penetrating and perfect Dharma, is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to, remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teachings.
In Buddhism, when Zen practitioners share their understandings of the teachings and practice, it's offered on the basis of dana paramita. Dana is a Pali word that means generosity or to give freely, and this is done without the expectation of anything in return when the opportunity arises. And those who share the teachings at Great Tree do so on a dana basis, so please support their practice by giving what you can. You can go to greattreetemple.org, and there's a tab at the top that says support. Our speaker today is our abbess, Rev Teijo Munnich. Daiju Teijo means Great Tree Right Stillness. Rev Teijo is a disciple and Dharma heir of Rev Dainin Katagiri. She studied with him from 1975 until his death in 1990, receiving formal training at Hokyoji in Minnesota, Tassajara Zen Mountain Center in California, and Hosshinji Sodo in Obama, Japan. Reverend Munnich was ordained as a Zen priest in 1981. In 1983, she began to envision a practice center and community at its heart, residential practice place for women, which came to be Great Tree. The title of her talk today is The Four Immeasurables.
Morning. Several years ago, I was at a Thich Nhat Hanh retreat, and I learned a verse for eating, and it was, with the first bite, I promised to practice loving kindness. With the second bite, I promised to help relieve the suffering of others. With the third bite, I promised to see others' joys as my own. With the fourth bite, I promised to practice the way of non-attachment. And I memorized these, and I was using them on my bites. And I never quite understood the relationship between these verses and eating, and I still don't. But recently, when I was in Bhutan, there was a dance called the Dance of the Immeasurables, and they wore masks and a very traditional dance. And I never actually identified what the four immeasurables were. But as it turns out, they are these four things that Thich Nhat Hanh identifies in these verses. Loving kindness, he said. The second one, he says, to help relieve the suffering of others. And that's usually translated as compassion. And the third one is sympathetic joy, to see others' joy as my own. And the fourth one is to practice the way of non-attachment. And interestingly, the usual translation of that is equanimity or balance. So as a result of this, and interestingly too, I chose a book. What's the name of that book that we're reading? Boundless Heart. Boundless Heart? Boundless Mind? Boundless what? Boundless Heart, right. Yeah, she's in the study group, so she knows. Boundless Heart. And I chose it partly because it was introduced to me a couple years ago by one of my Dharma brothers, Dokai Georgeson, Reverend Dokai Georgeson, who's at Hokyoji in Minnesota, our monastery in Minnesota. Or I say Minnesota Zen Center's monastery. And he gave a talk on it, and I was very interested, so I got the book and have been reading it. And I didn't make the connection, but it turns out that this is the book that we are studying in our study group, and it's about the four immeasurables. So it's kind of these have kind of come into my life. The interesting thing about Soto Zen is that it's experiential. So you sit down and face the wall and don't do anything. Shikantaza means Just sit. Shikantaza is the practice of Soto Zen. Just sit. And my teacher used to say Shikantaza means just sit down and shut up, which is something we don't do very often in our lives. So this is Shikantaza, and it's experiential, which means you sit down to kind of see, and you just notice, you see what happens. You just sit there. And it can be very boring, but my teacher used to say you have to become very boring to do this practice. I think he meant bored, but his English was sometimes a little questionable. But so you sit down and shut up and see what you experience. And then the idea is that maybe if you have an experience that you don't understand, you find a teacher who can help you understand your experience, and then you look to the teachings, or both. The difficulty of that is that there's a lot of these kinds of teachings that they never come up. They come up eventually, As I said, suddenly these four immeasurable what? I forgot what they're called. There's different ways of talking about them. Brahma Vihara is the Pali name. And Brahma, according to Sharon Salzberg, a Vipassana teacher, Brahma means best. And Vihara means a dwelling place or home. So your best home. And she says she thinks that means your most authentic self. The word for taking refuge, what we translate as taking refuge in English. The original Pali word means two things. It means both taking refuge and also to return home. And if you just take from the Japanese, it's that specific verb that means to return home. There's another word that means to return to where you came from, but this one specifically means to return to your home. And I think that's when we talk about taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, that really points to the embodiment of it. When I think of returning home to Buddha, returning home to Dharma, returning home to Sangha, it makes it more that I'm a part of it. Taking refuge, sometimes I never couldn't understand that, taking refuge. And I think it's kind of like if it's raining and you take refuge under a bush or under a rock or something like that. Which is a nice thing to have that refuge, but it's still thinking in that way is still putting Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha outside of myself. But when I say returning home, taking refuge in the home, in the authentic person, that is something I can feel in my body, and it's something that I think helps us to understand how to embody our spiritual practice. So, bless you. There's different ways to translate these. I said loving kindness. I found some interesting podcasts by Sharon Salzberg. She's done a lot of thinking about this stuff. And she said that you can translate it as loving kindness, and often it's translated as friendship. But friendship can be a little superficial. She translates it as connection. I think that's a really good translation, and it really gets to the heart of all of these Brahma Viharas, all of these immeasurables. Connection, that interconnection. And when we think of connection, if we think of friendship, our friends might be kind of, again, something outside of ourselves. But if we think about connection, then even those friends that we usually would think of as not us, we feel we are part of it. So the kindness, this loving kindness, or this friendship, this comes from this place of connection, and it's not something that you can define, but it's something that we recognize. We awaken to that connection, and the difficulty of that awakening is it's not something that we can understand intellectually. It's those moments during Zazen where people come and talk to me and they say, well, I have these moments. I think that I know that I'm not sleeping, but I'm not really awake either. I don't have a real, so your mind is not engaged in those moments. And when we allow our mind to disengage, even for a short time, we experience that oneness. And really, that's what we're all longing for. We're longing for that connection because we are connected. So we're longing to find some way of experiencing that connection. And I think, for me, I always say that in the early days when people used to say, why do you sit and face a wall? I said, I don't know, but when I get up, I feel different. I think it's because, as Dogen says, every time we sit down, we experience this. Even we don't necessarily recognize it, but we do experience it, and that's all that's necessary. And then we feel just a little different. We don't feel so outside of life. One of the things about talking about these 4 immeasurables is that they kind of bleed into each other. But as Sharon Salzberg points out, they are different, even though they're all very connected. And she said they have different challenges. I think that's something that we can recognize. We can recognize when we're trying to practice these. And even when I was saying these words, this verse of Thich Nhat Hanh's, I realized in retrospect that I wasn't really, these are still things in my head. But recently, as I've been thinking about these, I've been thinking, oh, what does it mean to really practice these things? And in the case of, for example, loving kindness or connection, just finding those ways to remember, finding a way to remember that connection. And for me, Zazen is a big help because not only does it help me recognize that connection by putting me right in the middle of it, but it also helps me see some of the things that I'm doing that are obstacles to experiencing that. And she says, let me just start here. It doesn't mean that you like somebody or you like everybody, but a deep down knowing that our lives are connected. And it begins with yourself. This is metta. It begins with yourself. I noticed early on in my practice, after about a year or two, that I was getting angry with people for behaving in ways that I was trying to change in myself. So we begin with ourselves. We begin with seeing those things about ourselves, because we can't express kindness unless we know kindness. And she says it's a shift in how we pay attention. Maybe only think about the mistakes you've made and your flaws and things like that. It's giving a little airspace to wishing yourself well, just to expand beyond that fixation of what's wrong. And then there's compassion. One of the things that Sharon Salzberg discusses in her podcast is, she said some scholars say, well, why do you say loving kindness? Why don't you just say love? And she said, well, first of all, love is a complicated word in American culture. Actually, I know in Japanese, love is considered, more desire. So, for example, I've talked to my friend Shihako Okumura about how, putting love into a Dharma name. And he said, well, it's that kind of desire that, it's not such a desirable word, so to speak. And she talks about a little bit about that. But then she said, compassion is love that's looking at suffering. Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, it's said that Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world. And that's compassion. And the compassion really comes from our own understanding of our suffering. Because you can't really understand someone else's suffering if you don't understand suffering from the inside. It just becomes kind of almost an arrogance, like pity or something. So compassion involves that. And interestingly enough, one of the things that I realized as I was looking at these is that joy, or sympathetic joy, which means the kind of joy that experiencing others' joys as your own, as Thich Nhat Hanh says it, that joy has that same quality, that we can't share joy if we don't know joy, if we don't embody joy, really. So compassion, she says, it's the particular sense of poignancy or tenderness that we get when we recognize it's hard. Things are hard. And if they're not hard, we're still also vulnerable. Look how quickly they can change. And there's a caring that comes from that recognition of our own vulnerability, our own suffering, our own pain, our own fears. When we look at our own fears, then we can be with another person in a compassionate way. And just a second. Okay, Mari's note taker is here. That always confuses me. So sympathetic joy is feeling happiness and happiness for others. Instead of feeling jealous or envious, you have a sense of joy rather than competition, the sense of being ripped off, or it shouldn't have come to you, or it should have come to me, which keeps us embittered. This is what Sharon Salzberg, how she describes it. It doesn't take away from the accomplishments of the other. We're just left miserable when we think in that way. So jealousy, And in the book we're reading now by Christina Feldman, she says, I think this is her, the quality of sympathetic joy or joy in the happiness of others is known as mudita in the Pali language. Sympathetic joy is what happens when we actually feel happiness for the happiness of others. We actually can be happy when someone else is happy. We don't need to feel that their happiness is taking something away from us. We can recognize that their happiness is our happiness and feel at one with them in that way. So see, this goes back to the idea of connection and loving kindness. And when we recognize that connection, I think we also can recognize how we affect each other by how we feel, or what we embody. When it says, when you receive sympathetic joy from others and when you don't. When someone is happy that something great happened for you, their delight in your good fortune feels like a tremendous gift. Then there are times when something really good happens for you and the other person may look at you and smile, but you get the feeling that they would be just fine if it all went away. And that feels terrible. And that somehow feels bad because of your happiness, your good fortune. And anyway, that they somehow feel bad because of your happiness, that affects you. Equanimity. I like how, my name Teijo, the Jo of Teijo, it means silence or quiet or stillness, but when my teacher translated, he also gave me a translation of equanimity. And I didn't know what equanimity meant. I had to go and look it up. But it has to do with balance. And so to think of this fourth immeasurable, equanimity, as non-attachment, I think really speaks to that balance. The story about when Buddha awakened, he had this vision of these two men in a boat, and one had a lute or something, and he was telling one was telling the other, how to tune it. He said, if you tune it too tight, the strings break, but if it's too loose, it doesn't make a good sound. And this gave Shakyamuni Buddha the awakening of the middle way, which he fleshed out in the Four Noble Truths. But the middle way is really the way of non-attachment, the way of equanimity. It's embracing everything that comes along, whether it's good feeling or not so good feeling, whether it's happiness or sadness, that it's all part of life. And when we embrace it, that means we have a better understanding of it, and we understand how a lot of our suffering comes from our mind. We create our suffering. And this suffering becomes becomes a habit because we attach to a certain way of, it has to be this way, it has to be that way. So I think non-attachment is the ultimate practice of equanimity, ultimate experience of equanimity. There was a verse somewhere, I don't know where I found this verse, but there is no greater love than the immeasurable friendliness that can embrace beings, all events, and all experience with unshakable kindness. What is unshakable kindness? And I mentioned in the dance of the Immeasurables, the Bhutanese dance, they were wearing masks. And so I took videos of all of their dances, so I was going over this video of the Immeasurables, and I noticed these masks were animal masks. So I looked up, what animals were associated with the 4 Immeasurables. And the snow lion, which is really a mythical animal. The snow lion is what is associated with loving kindness or connection. And I'll try to talk a little bit more about this, but I'll just tell you what the 4 of them are. The second one, compassion, is a tiger, not a mythical animal. The third one is a dragon, associated with sympathetic joy. And the fourth one is a Garuda, associated with equanimity. A Garuda is also a mythical animal that is somehow related to an eagle. Let me just scroll down. I've got way too many notes here. I found something. I think it's at the end, actually. I can't find it now. So I haven't quite come to understand. Oh yeah, this is what I was looking for. I haven't quite come to understand the relationship between these animals. What qualities? How to see these qualities? But I'm working on that now, and maybe I'll have it figured out by tomorrow. If I do, I'll give another talk. But what I wanted to read to you is the 4 immeasurables as antidotes. So loving kindness, or metta, or connection, transforms territorial aggression into universal goodwill. So that I think we were talking in the study group a little bit about seeing things in a broader way. I think this is speaking to that. Transforms territorial aggression. I mean, think of somebody you don't like. That immediately came to mind. It was like, why, how can I turn this around? Compassion, karuna, softens. That's another word that we were talking about in the study group, when we soften. Softens the predatory instinct by understanding and absorbing the suffering of others. Softens the predatory instinct. sympathetic joy, mudita, eliminates the tiger's. Oh, this was all put when I found it. It was with the. It had to do with the tiger, but anyway, I think that it just applies across the board. Eliminates the competition for resources by celebrating the success of others. So it eliminates competition. Equanimity, upekkha, calms the unpredictable fluctuations, maintaining balance in both good and bad times. When I first used to think about the middle way, I used to talk about it. It's what you experience when you're swinging from here to here. But I came to realize that it's actually from here to here. But what we do is sometimes we go to an extreme when we're trying to make an adjustment to find balance. We go to the other extreme. But it's a tiny movement. And the movement really is to embrace non-attachment, to let go of a particular fixation, a particular way of thinking about good and bad. Even saying those words creates this kind of sense of discrimination in my mind, But this is the way we do. This is the way we function. This is the way our minds work. We discriminate. That's what the mind does. So we have to recognize that the mind is doing that, and not allow the mind to say this is the way it is, because everything is changing all the time. So I think that's all I have to say right now. Does anybody have any thoughts? Yes?
Question, so it's metta, karuna, upekkha, what's the about?
Mudita.
Mudita.
Mudita, I think, is the third one. It's the joy.
Mudita.
Yeah. And upekkha, or sometimes upeksha, I don't know. I guess this is the Pali, is equanimity.
The other day I was...
Can you speak up?
Okay. I was in New York doing His Holiness's empowerment and teaching. I was talking with the Tibetan Lama. I asked him, what's the difference between love and compassion?
And what?
Love and compassion. Like loving.
Oh, love and compassion, yeah.
And he gave me a lot of examples. I was like, just tell me the definition. And he said that love is wish someone to be happy, and compassion is wish someone to be free from suffering.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very interesting to have this.
He's talking about loving kindness, yeah.
Yeah, and compassion. I was like, what's the difference? It feels
Yeah.
so similar.
Yeah, they do seem similar, don't they?
And it's what he said. Well, what do you think?
So did you hear what she said? Okay. She said that she was talking to a lama, a Tibetan lama, and she wanted to know the difference between love and compassion. And he said, love is to wish happiness for others, and that would correlate with loving kindness. And compassion is to wish for that others would to be released from suffering, would be free from suffering.
Mm.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe the difference between the two.
Mm. Mm. And also, I've been feeling into the feeling of equanimity. Since I started to explore living a monastic life.
The what?
Living a monastic life.
Uh-huh.
I started experiencing more and more spaciousness and stillness in me, no matter what's happening around me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I tried to describe this, and a friend said, "Oh, that's equanimity." I was like, "Oh," because I tried to so long to understand what is equanimity. What's the difference between when you said non-attachment, but sometimes it's so easy to make that become dissociation.
Right.
We're escaping things
Yeah.
from, and I find the difference, the subtle difference of equanimity versus dissociation. They're both non-attached, but one is coming from acceptance, and one is coming from avoiding.
Yeah, right. Yeah, she was talking about non-attachment can be either, equanimity, or it can be dissociation. And the dissociation comes from avoidance, and the equanimity comes from balance. Is that what you said? Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I think that's the way we have to think about these too, is how do they work in our real life, Otherwise, we're just kind of overlaying an idea on the situation and calling it compassion or calling it loving kindness. So that kindness, it has to come from a recognition of our connection. And the sympathetic joy, it can only come from that. So in a sense, I feel like it all goes back to loving kindness. But this morning I was thinking, it all goes back to equanimity. Because when we have equanimity, then we can experience that spaciousness that you're talking about. But the equanimity, where does it come from, So in a way, when we practice these things, just like when we practice the precepts, we find out, kind of where our difficulties are or where our challenges are.
At work, we've actually been doing an equanimity meditation, like from the Theravada tradition.
Can you speak up a little louder so they can hear you?
Yeah. At work, we've been doing an equanimity meditation, like the loving kindness, where you kind of like use phrases and imagine different beings and stuff. And somebody in the meditation just shared another like analogy for equanimity, what it felt like to them, that I thought was really helpful. Which was, he said he felt like a sunflower as we were like describing different situations, that he was just turning to face them very directly. And that felt really helpful to me, just like there's so much intensity in life, like suffering of other people, their joy, your reactions to it, but like I liked thinking of equanimity as being able to just take it in as warmth or nourishment even.
Right. Did you hear what he said?
She.
Sorry. Talking about how someone in a discussion group that she was in recently, talked about equanimity as kind of a sunflower that, so you said, just kind of faces whatever is happening, and takes it in.
Right, yeah.
Whatever situation it is, and takes it in. And when you said sunflower, I immediately thought of joy, because the presence of a sunflower, and how, that's the mudita kind of part of it. Oh, I started to read this verse. There is no greater love than the immeasurable friendliness that can embrace all beings, all events, and all experiences with unshakable kindness. Unshakable kindness. I love that. There is no compassion greater than the fearless heart that can turn towards suffering and pain, tremble with empathy, and live with the commitment to end the causes of anguish. There is no greater happiness than inwardly generated joy and peace. There is no equanimity more unshakable than the profound poise of the liberated heart that can meet the world of ungraspable conditions and events without being shattered. I'm going to read that again. There is no equanimity more unshakable than the profound poise of the liberated heart that can meet the world of ungraspable conditions and events without being shattered. Right? Yes.
So as I'm practicing more, I'm noticing a lot of suffering and just a feeling of just chaotic inner world come up. And could you speak to how to have equanimity towards that? And I feel a lot of fear.
Just he's feeling a lot of fear because when he's sitting a lot, he's feeling kind of the pain of the world or the chaos.
Of my life and my patterns.
Right.
And this suffering that I created in my life through my own behaviors.
Right.
Over time.
And the thing about it is our fears sometimes drive our thinking. And if we can recognize what the fear is that's driving it, I think you can recognize how much we create with our own minds. And that's non-attachment, to recognize that. Because as soon as you recognize it, you let go of it. And then maybe you grasp it again, but the next grasp isn't quite as tight. Then you recognize it again, and then you let it, at that moment, that recognition, you're letting it go. And so being able to see these things is really a very important part of this practice. And to allow ourselves to be uncomfortable sometimes in order to recognize, and sometimes it takes longer, because some of these things come from a very deep attachment, very deep fear, or things we've been taught, to be afraid of. But some things are easier to figure out. Does that make sense? It's called a practice. It's not called a perfect.
Yeah, I heard you say recognizing where the fear is coming from.
Yep.
Can I share something to add to that? There's a very
Can you speak up?
So for the suffering comes in to our mind if we give energy to more of the thoughts like you shared your girl. If we remove our energy and attention to the sensation we feel in our body and focus on the sensation of the suffering caused in our body, and just like the Suzuki Roshi said, everything changes, even the suffering state will change and move naturally. And that's how letting go happens naturally. It's to focus on the sensation without expecting it to disappear, but hold it with equanimity. And then the suffering actually naturally dissolves. That's the natural state because everything moves. Focus on the sensation.
Just talking about how we make our fears worse by giving them the energy of being afraid of our fears.
One image I've also found really helpful in thinking about.
Can you speak up?
Yeah, one image that I've also found really helpful in dealing with my own suffering. And I don't know if this is more compassion or loving kindness, I'm not exactly sure, but it's like the image of like holding your own suffering like a mother holds a baby, right? And just treating your own suffering like this crying child. And I feel like it helps you kind of like, instead of beating yourself up for your own patterns and, just like treat yourself like a loving mother would treat a child. And it can help soften.
Did you hear what she said? I don't have my volume all the way up. Did you hear what she said? She was talking about treating your suffering like a mother, holding its child. Yeah.
Just to piggyback on that, Thich Nhat Hanh has a book he wrote for kids. I think it's called like Pebble in Your Pocket or something like that. And he brings that up exactly, and that's how you should treat your fear. Is when the fear arises, you just hold it like it's your little baby. But he specifies that the obligation of the mother is not to stop the baby from crying.
That's a good point.
You just hold the fear and let it live there. But that comfort makes it dissipate over time.
Right. I think that's a really important point. She was talking about how Thich Nhat Hanh points out that if you, when you hold the baby, it's not to stop the baby from crying. It's just to hold the baby. And actually Sharon Salzberg makes that point too, is that when you're being compassionate with someone, it's not to do something or to teach them something or to solve their problem. It's just to be there. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. Baby. Yep. Yes.
I really thought it was interesting, this, and I'm not sure if it was a depiction or more of a just relation, these sort of four beasts or predators or creatures associated with each immeasurable. Because like before hearing that, if you had asked me maybe to come up with a creature that embodied those traits, it might be like a dove or like a little bunny rabbit or an owl. And I think there's nothing wrong with that, but associating these ideas with these creatures of like great power, I think helps me understand how much they can do and just how effective they can be at, reducing suffering, enjoying the rest of the world, or harmonizing with the rest of the world. And yeah, I never considered that.
Thank you. Like Manjushri's sword cutting through delusion, right? Yeah. And it struck me often in a lot of the paintings in Bhutan that how Tibetan Buddhism really embraces these very fierce deities, and that's part of the whole practice is confronting these fierce demons and things, that, and it's not hidden, it's not like, that we have to push that aside. It's, the sunflower facing it, taking it in.
It also reminds me a little bit of the mountain seat ceremony of like this snake, or this staff is a snake. I can't remember the exact words, but
I bet you do.
It's 1 foot long, poison snake.
Yeah.
He's talking about the mountain seat ceremony where the Shuso holds up the staff and says, "This staff is a 10-foot long poisonous snake." What does that mean? Now Genjo's going to explain what that means.
Right, that's the question.
Sorry, I put him on the spot.
I think one thing I think about is what Joe you just said of like the actual the power in these. I think there can be maybe a mistaken idea that like these things are soft, and they are, but the softness is powerful. The loving kindness, the metta, they're really transformative. They're really powerful agents of change. That's what I was thinking about what you mentioned, the softening, and how important and how conscious I've been of that for me, the hardness that I hold in my body. And recently it's been very at the forefront, and I've been practicing Aikido, and that's the feedback I get again and again, is to soften. And Aikido is all about connection, and if the power comes from the connection, and if when I'm hard and I'm holding, I can't connect, I can't actually feel myself and feel the people I'm working with. And it's actually, the more I soften, the more connection there is, and that's really the heart of the practice.
Chicho.
Chincho.
We're reliving the mountain seat ceremony here.
I'm sweating.
Okay, so I think we need to finish up because it's 11.
May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace. Gonna make some announcements.
Yes. We've got a pretty busy June at Great Tree. But I'll start with that. Tomorrow there's a full moon gathering ceremony. And the theme is always setting aside and beginning anew. So that's at 7 p.m. tomorrow, in person or on Zoom. There's also, on Saturday, June 6th, Dr. Lai from Urban Dharma will be giving a Dharma talk about Wesak, which is Buddha Day. And then that day there will also be a ceremony at Urban Dharma. So if you're interested in learning about that or participating in the ceremony, that's June 6th. You can also email me. The day after, June 7th, we will have another volunteer work day, which is a lot of groundskeeping, cleaning the temple, things like that. There's also a family retreat, and we're getting lots of sign-ups. So if you want to get signed up for that, that's June 12th through 14th. All ages welcome. And then last thing is the practice period. The summer practice period will be from June 15th to July 17th. And it's going to be on a section of the Boundless Heart book that we were talking about. It'll just be covering another one of those sections, so we'll be studying one of those immeasurables.
Joy.
I think it said section 2 is compassion.
Oh, compassion, that's right. We're
Compassion.
just finishing metta.
I see.
So compassion
Yes.
is next, right.
So if you're interested in any of that, just send me an email at info@greattreetemple.org. And yeah.
Okay, now I'll do 3 prostrations and then we'll have a exit, 4-bell exit.
Thanks, everybody.